Distinguished colleagues, the coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, has shown us how vulnerable humankind is when facing biological threats. It has already taken and continues taking a huge number of human lives. In 1975, when the Convention on Banning the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention came into force, we had the hope that the world managed to get rid itself of at least those biological threats which are created by men, because everyone who signed this understood the huge risks of using biological weapons and decided to forego any plans to develop it. Unfortunately, we have reason to believe that these hopes have not been fully fulfilled. We convened the meeting today because, as Russia is conducting a special military operation in Ukraine, we discovered a truly shocking facts of emergency cleanup by the Kiev regime of the traces of a military biological program which is being implemented by Kiev with its support by the United States Ministry of Defense. Our Ministry of Defense, Russian Ministry of Defense, now has documents which confirms that on the territory of Ukraine there was a network consisting of at least 30 biological laboratories in which very dangerous biological experiments are being conducted, aimed at strengthening the pathogenic qualities of the plague, anthrax, tularemia, cholera, and other lethal diseases using synthetic biology. This work is being done and funded and supervised by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency of the United States, including in the interest of the National Center for Medical Intelligence of the United States Ministry of Defense. The key role in implementing this program was placed by the Central Reference Laboratory with the Biosafety Level 3, using for its the basis of the Ukrainian Scientific Anti-Plague Institute named after Mechnikov and located in Odessa. An active participant here was also conducted by research centers in other cities of Ukraine, in Kiev, in Lvov, in Kharkov, in Dnepr, in Kherson, in Ternopil, in Uzhhorod, and Vinnytsia. The results of this work were being sent to military biological centers in the United States, including into the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, into the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, into the Naval Medical Research of the U.S. Navy, and into the U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratories in Fort Detrick, which used to be being key facilities of the American program to develop biological weapons. All of these materials are available on the website of our Ministry of Defense, and our Ministry of Defense is describing them in the course of their daily briefings. Let me just dwell on the more salient examples. Our military became aware of the details of the project UP4, which was being conducted in laboratories of Kiev, Kharkov, and Odessa. The goal is to study the possibility of spreading particularly dangerous infections using migratory birds. And this includes the highly pathogenic influenza H5N1, whose lethality for people reaches 50%, as well as in the Newcastle disease. Yeah, there was another project where the vector of the potential agents of biological weapon, bats, were considered. Amongst priority areas for study, they include the bacterial and viral pathogens that could spread from bats to people, such as plague, leptospirosis, and as well as filoviruses and coronaviruses. As can see from the project documents, the United States actively funded the biological projects in Ukraine. Experiments were being conducted to study the spread of dangerous diseases using ectoparasites such as lice and fleas. Even non-specialists understand that such experiments are one of the more reckless because they do not give you an opportunity to control how the situation is going to develop further. Similar studies using lice and fleas as agents were conducted in the 1940s by the infamous Squad 731 of the Japanese Army, whose members, by the way, found refuge in the United States and escaped justice. Ukraine has a unique geographical location. A whole number of migratory routes cross there for potential spreaders of disease, and many of them go through Russia and Eastern Europe. The research I just mentioned was conducted at the very heart of Eastern Europe and in immediate proximity of the Russian border. As the data we received shows us, the birds which were ringed and released as a result of bio research in Kherson Zoo, they were caught in Ivanovo and Voronezh Oblast of the Russian Federation later. And the analysis of the materials shows that there was a transfer from biolaboratory in Kharkov abroad of about 140 containers with ectoparasites of bats, and we do not know what was the further fate of these dangerous materials and what a consequence is going to be of the fact that there was no international control there, and they will simply dissolve, quite probably, over Europe. In any event, there is a very high risk that they will be stolen and used for terrorist purposes, or that they will be sold on the black market. Using the pretext of curing for coronavirus, from Ukraine into the Walter Reed Institute in the United States, several thousand samples of blood serum of the people was taken, and most of them are of Slavic extraction. Everyone knows how careful people in the West are when it comes to transferring biomaterials of Western nationals abroad, and there is reason for that, because in theory bioagents can be created which can selectively target specific ethnic groups. At the same time, the activity of biological laboratories, who we notice have been accessed since 2014, and what is being implemented by the United States within the program of so-called reform of Ukrainian healthcare, led to an uncontrolled growth in Ukraine when it comes to particularly dangerous and economically important infections. There's a growing number of German measles cases, diphtheria and tuberculosis. Cases of measles went up by a factor of more than 100. World Health Organization declared Ukraine a country with a high risk of an outbreak of poliomyelitis. There's also evidence to show that in Kharkov, where one of such laboratories is located, in January 2016, 20 Ukrainian soldiers died from the swine flu and 200 more were hospitalized. By March of the same year, in Ukraine, 364 people already died from swine flu. The outbreak of African swine fever in Ukraine have become a regular occurrence. In 2019, there was an outbreak of a disease which symptomatically is very close to plague. At the time when the military biological studies in the United States were removed because of danger to the people, the Kiev authorities basically agreed to make their country into an experimental platform and using their citizens as guinea pigs. These experiments, with a potential risk for the entire country, is something that went on for years, and we can see in this yet another confirmation of an extraordinary cynicism of Kiev's mentors, who tell us all the time that they're very concerned by the fate of the Ukrainian people. If we are to believe what is being said by Reuters, and the WHO recommended that Ukraine should eliminate the particularly dangerous pathogens, they have to make sure that they avoid leaks. Otherwise, this could lead to the spread of diseases amongst the population. And we don't know whether Kiev implemented that recommendation. The Ministry of Defense of ours has materials stating that all of the serious studies of high level of danger in biological laboratories in Ukraine were conducted under the leadership of specialists of the United States who have diplomatic immunity. Currently, according to our Ministry of Defense, the Kiev regime, according to the request of their Western mentors, are trying to clean it all up to make sure that the Russian side does not find direct evidence that the United States and Ukraine are violating Article 1 of Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. Their biological programs are being urgently closed up, and the Ministry of Health of Ukraine set as the goal to, as of the 24th of February, fully destroy the bioagents in laboratories. The analysis of instructions in laboratories tells us that the order of liquidations is aimed at their irretrievable elimination. Our analysis shows that in Lviv alone, 233 containers with leptospirosis agents were destroyed, 30 with tularemia, 10 with brucellosis, 5 with plague. Overall, 320 containers. The nomenclature and the excessive number of biopathogens leads us to believe that these work were conducted within the framework of a military biological program. I would like to address my colleagues from Europe separately. Right next to the European Union, you've had an experimental platform for extremely dangerous biological trials. And we call upon you to think about a very real biological danger to the people in European countries, which can result from an uncontrolled spread of bioagents from Ukraine, which, as we have seen with COVID-19, is impossible to stop. And if there is such a scenario, then all Europe will be covered by it. Representatives of the United States provide confusing information about the involvement of the United States in this activity. Victoria Nuland, Assistant Secretary of State, basically confirmed the fact that there were dangerous studies being conducted in Ukrainian laboratories in Congress in 8th of March. There was a direct question put by Senator Marco Rubio, and she replied and said that in Ukraine there are research structures which should not end up in the hands of the Russian armed forces. End of quote. At the same time, the State Department continue insisting that on the territory of Ukraine there are no laboratories under the control of the United States. We would like to, in this regard, put a question to the American delegation. How can this tally with the agreement of 2005 between your Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Health of Ukraine about cooperation in the area of development technologies and pathogens which could be used so as to develop bioweapons? So this document exists in the internet, and in line with Article 3 of this agreement, the Ministry of Defense of the United States can extend assistance to the Ministry of Health of Ukraine in the area of joint biological research, determining threats from biological agents and working out a response to them as relates to, and I quote, to the dangerous pathogens deployed on objects on the territory of Ukraine. And I would like to underscore here that biological threats, because of its very nature, knows no borders. There is no region in the world today who can feel safe. The United States are overseeing several hundreds of laboratories in about 30 countries in the Middle East and Africa, Southeast Asia, and also on the perimeter of the former USSR. Placing it under international verification is something that Washington categorically refusing to do. They've blocked, since 2001, a legally binding protocol under the Biological and Toxic Weapons Convention about creating an effective verification mechanism to ensure compliance. And this can but lead us to the thought that the United States have something to hide. I call upon colleagues in these regions to think about what kind of an activity Washington is conducting on their territory, what the consequences for your people will be. I can foresee what the reaction will be from our Western colleagues, who I'm sure are going to be saying now that all of this information is fake and Russian propaganda. But this is self-delusion, and I do not think this will be helpful to the European people in case there are outbreaks in Ukraine or neighboring states with further spread and bringing in their wake dangerous diseases. The risk of this is very real, given the interest that the radical nationalist groups in Ukraine are showing towards the work with dangerous pathogens conducted together with the Ministry of Defense of the United States. We also know that in the case of any such incident, Pentagon told their Ukrainian colleagues to immediately accuse the armed forces of the Russian Federation of this, say that they are striking against scientific and medical institutions, and or link these incidents with the Russian diversionary groups. The Ministry of Defense of Russia continues analyzing the biological situation in Ukraine and the materials we keep receiving. What we told you today is a very small portion of the information that we have. Detailed information is something that we will disseminate in the very near future. As an official document of Security Council, you will be able to study it. We think it is our duty to keep the Security Council informed of the situation when it comes to the military biological activity by the United States in Ukraine. It creates real risk for international peace and security, and we intend to revert to the discussion of this topic in the very near future. We do not exclude the possibility of invoking the mechanism of Articles 5 and 6 of the Biological Toxic Weapons Convention. At present, however, we expect to hear responses from the American side to the questions that we put. I thank you, Madam President.